Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Leah Jones, and I am the Education Coordinator at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Thank you all so much for joining us again for another episode this week. Today is a special episode to celebrate and reflect on the importance of Indigenous Peoples Day as we approach the official holiday on Monday. So to get us started, I would just like to pause for a moment for a brief land acknowledgement. While we're on a video call right now and many of us are joining from different places, it is critical to remind ourselves that we gather on the unceded land of the Indigenous peoples. I am joining from so-called Richmond, Virginia, and I am currently located on the land of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples. If you are unsure whose land you are on and would like to find out, you can visit native-land.ca to find out. So since 1937, Americans have celebrated the theft, subduing, and eradication of Indigenous peoples in the name of what has been historically known as Columbus Day. In recent years, we are finally beginning to see a shift in the national narrative of how we understand this holiday in American history. In order to begin to acknowledge the great injustices that Indigenous communities have endured and continue to fight to this day, observing this holiday means unlearning old American history lessons and rejecting the stories that were sold that places the birth of this nation through a lens of sunshine, new hope, and discovery. Ultimately, recognizing that this historically glorified discovery is actually a fallacy. This change from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day is only the beginning of a long road to addressing the reality of the history of this country and bringing the voices of Indigenous communities that have for so long been muffled and silenced to the forefront. To have more discussion on this topic, we are so grateful today to be in conversation with Taysha DeVaughan. She is the president of the Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards and a member of the Virginia Environmental Justice Council. Thank you so much for being here today, Taysha. How are you doing?
Hi, Marewaka. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, wow. It's still playing. I'm sorry, Taysha, one more time. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. So just to start off this conversation more broadly, how are Indigenous people affected by the changes in our climate? And why do you feel that protecting the environment of our Indigenous neighbors is so important and actually really urgent?
Very good questions. Well, to begin with, it's very important to understand how it impacts our communities because we are called what people in our groups call frontline communities. So those are going to be the first that are impacted and the people that are impacted the most. 9 times out of 10, these communities are going to be people of color or low income, which is obviously going to be Indigenous communities. And the consequences of climate change are very real for us because when you're in frontline communities, what that means a lot of times is that your infrastructure is undeveloped, right? Your local governments are undeveloped, things like that. So when you're dealing with droughts on top of already not having running water, that just compromises that issue to begin with. So for example, the Dene people out in the West, they have that issue, right? Like they don't have a whole lot of really good infrastructure for running water. So the more that the droughts happen out there, the less that they're going to be able to be self-sufficient and independent.
And they're feeling the effects of climate change in even harsher way. Like it's doubled. The effects are doubled, tripled, because, like you said, the infrastructure is already poor. So it's like compounded on top of this.
Yeah, and most of our indigenous communities are in these places that are going to be impacted, no matter what the climate crisis is. So if you're in the West, and it's going to be drought, it could be an oil spill down in the South, it could be hurricanes down in Louisiana, right? I mean, hurricanes here in Virginia. So there's all of our communities are in these places that are going to get hit first on whatever type of consequences come out of the different climate changes.
Absolutely. So, now moving more so on the topic of Columbus Day and the change that we're seeing in this national narrative that I mentioned earlier in the introduction of this episode today. What are your thoughts on this new shift from, Columbus Day, what we know as Columbus Day, to, now Indigenous Peoples Day, and the nation beginning to acknowledge, all of the outrageous injustices, to Indigenous peoples, that we know have happened and continue to happen, today?
Yeah, so my thoughts are it's about time. It is really about time that this shift has happened. And I'm excited for it because that to me tells me that the public perception of the way that this land was discovered, right? And that there was some grand cosmic event that started this fairy tale that we, call the Americas today, and then led to manifest destiny, which we know leads to the displacement and all of that horrific tale for the rest of our people out west. So I'm glad that we are having this awakening within our nation. And I think that it allows us to have these really hard conversations about what it's like to be proud, right? To even be American, because we can still be proud and acknowledge our really hard history, which is why I think this is also so really important. Because protecting where Indigenous people reside and protecting our environments, we're targeted, right? This is not an accident. This was not just something that they were like, well, we're just going to do this, and this happened later, and oops, there's pollution. This was planned, and I feel that we are discovering that as a nation, that we're not accepting the lies that have been told to us, and we're rewriting that story in the way of a lens of truth. And I also feel that, especially in Indigenous communities, like it's been a long time coming. I'm a member of the Comanche Nation, and we have not acknowledged this day as Columbus Day for a very long time. We call it Chiefs Day. So in our own communities, we have done a lot to rebrand and redo and change the shift of the narrative. So very excited to see it happen across the nation.
Absolutely. I'm excited too. And I think I'm really happy that you also mentioned Manifest Destiny, because I can't help but also think about, how denying these injustices that have been, done to the Indigenous peoples have also been so easily, a reflection of the way that we also treat our environment, and the pillaging of our land, and what, has left us in the place that we are today of extreme climate crisis, only further affecting, like we mentioned earlier, these same communities that have been silenced for so long and ignored, and in many ways, erased, quite literally. So, that is such an important point. Do you feel like you have any other thoughts about how this, can directly relate to environmental justice? This shift from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you? I know you mentioned that in your own, personal tribes, you all call this holiday Chiefs Day, or have referred to this holiday as Chiefs Day for a while now. Is there any other, thoughts that come to mind, or specific parts of your celebration of this holiday that relate to it? Oh, I think we have. Okay, there we go.
I did not hear your question.
Oh, I was just asking you if we lost you for a second. But I was just asking you if you had any other thoughts that came to mind, in terms of environmental justice, thinking about this shift from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. What do you feel like that speaks to in terms of a lens of environmental justice?
Yeah, so I think that shows us too that in our lens of environmental justice, one of the things that we want to do is definitely put the most valuable and the most vulnerable, sorry, the most vulnerable and the most impacted people at the forefront of what we do, right? So that shows that we value them. And I think that's what you said earlier. That's a reflection on what we should do when it comes to environmental justice. It's the communities that are most impacted and most vulnerable that need to be put at the forefront. They're the ones that need the most funding. They need the biggest voice. They need the most outreach. They need the most advocacy. So I feel that as we have this shift of a consciousness of a lens of going to justice, that environmental justice and social justice walk hand in hand. And I hope that particular lens strengthens, that we need to have both of those in order for either to be truly successful.
Absolutely. And I feel like I see so much now, just as we start to see this shift in the national narrative, and people beginning to honestly actually hear Indigenous voices. We can see that in many ways, Indigenous peoples were like the original stewards of the earth, and celebrating Indigenous culture and celebrating and learning the ways of our Indigenous neighbors. We can, in fact, also help save our own environments, and figure out how to live in community, but also care for the land that we live on.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, 100%. Yeah, like you said that well. Like we were here for thousands of years, stewarding the environment in which a way that it was symbiotic, right? Like we didn't take more or less than what was needed. Um, and I do feel that the more that we have these voices at the front, the more that we have the Indigenous voices at the beginning, at the planning processes, at the outreach processes, from that start and from that get go, we have knowledge, right? We have this knowledge that we're willing to bring to the table to create a sustainable development process, and it needs to be valued more. So I'm glad we're doing it in our spaces, in environmental justice and in social justice and in our movements. But yes, it needs to be on a whole nother level.
Absolutely. So now, I think I have a few more questions for you, but I want to now start thinking about turning this larger, broader conversation of Indigenous peoples across the nation, more so now, just in terms of Virginia. Do you know of any ongoing environmental justice fights in Virginia Indigenous communities?
Specific to specific Indigenous communities, I would say I'm not aware of any at the moment. However, I know that we have been fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would have impacted some Indigenous sites. Also, the Indigenous communities that are recognized in Virginia are mainly coastal communities. So that's the water, hydroelectricity, um, all of those different issues when it comes to the coastal resilience package, I think is important to look at when you're looking at Indigenous communities, but also reaching out, right? Just reaching out to Indigenous communities is a big deal. So I'm hoping that on the Environmental Justice Council, I will learn more about the Indigenous communities in the North, because those are the ones that we don't really have a whole lot of access to. And where I'm from in Southwest Virginia, used to be Cherokee and Shawnee land, but they were displaced, right? So they're no longer in this state. So, you could go and check out the Eastern Band of Cherokee, which is now in North Carolina, and you can go to their webpage. You can go to their environmental justice or environmental department, and you can give them a call and ask them, what issues are you guys working on? Is there anything that I can get involved with? Is there any volunteer work that I can do? So I don't know of anything specifically, but there are a number of ways that you can get involved, and I'm sure there are a number of issues that each individual tribe is dealing with themselves.
Right. So This question you've kind of touched on a little bit already, but I am wondering, like, do you have any thoughts of ways that we can work together with our Indigenous neighbors in terms of like more policy things? I know you've already said a little bit about outreaching is a great first step. But do you have any other things that come to mind or ideas that come to mind about things we can, or actions, ways that we can bring the voices of our Indigenous neighbors into the laws that we see in the state of Virginia or even across the nation?
Yeah, so I think that land access is something that a lot of tribes are dealing with, especially when it comes to hunting and fishing, in along those lines. So any type of policies that is public access, we want to look at any policies that have to do with federal spending and state spending, especially as it comes to development and infrastructure. The Clean Water Act, I mean, that's a federal policy, but we also have state versions of these policies. So that the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of these things, I think we should always be aware of, because those are the things that are definitely going to impact Indigenous communities. But again, also just really getting active, as in becoming a volunteer for environmental justice in your own community will definitely support what's happening in Indigenous communities, because so the more that we can strengthen and operate through these lenses, it will spill over into what Indigenous communities are doing. So if you can't specifically reach out to an Indigenous community and get specifically involved in a policy that is for them, and for us get involved in something locally.
Right. And if people do want to get involved with something locally, what are the ways that people can do that? Is it just through accessing a website, and then reaching out to any contact information that's on that website? Um,
I think that's a good way to start. A lot of places will have their own like regional grassroots type of organizations that you'll have to do some research on. But there's some great national environmental justice organizations that you can go to for a lot of information to find out more about what you can do. So like Climate Justice Alliance is one of them. The Indigenous Environmental Network is one of them. The Indigenous Environmental Network is a great place to really start if you want to find out like regionally what you can get involved in.
Excellent. Thanks so much. These are all really great resources, I think, for people trying to get involved. I think, especially here in Virginia, considering the history of this state, especially getting involved with local Indigenous communities is something that I think more of our neighbors should definitely be actively working towards, right? Especially our advocates as well.
I think in our environmental justice council for the state, we have a stipulation in there that requires that we have some voices from the Indigenous community. So I feel like that can be strengthened, right? It's not just a requirement that we have a few. It should be a requirement that it's more and across the board, right? It's not just an environmental justice that we should have Indigenous voices. It's also economic development. It's also trade and commerce. It's also all of those. So yes, I think that from our communities, there needs to be more of an outcry and a demand to have Indigenous folks at the forefront of state and local government.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your insight. I think we're starting to come towards the end of our questions. So now, from this discussion, we've already heard so much about how we should be trying our best to support Indigenous communities in this fight for environmental justice, but also these fights are intersectional. So recognizing that. Are there any other ways that we can continue to support our Indigenous family, our Indigenous neighbors, other than volunteering or just trying to connect with these local tribes?
So I always think that of course spreading the word is a big part, right? posting on social media, getting that out there, reposting articles, engaging in the comment section. Those things are all very important. But we do unfortunately still live in a very capitalist society. So donate, right? Donate wherever you can really find an organization that you feel is really putting boots on the ground in an Indigenous community. So like Climate Justice Alliance and the Indigenous Environmental Network are definitely two of those. Those are national, they're not state, but they could help you find that. So yeah, donate. $5 goes a long way. $10 goes a long way when we're talking about getting out into the field.
Oh, that's so important. Putting your money where your mouth is. I think that is something, especially now, that we're seeing as well. And as we start to shift this national narrative, like just because of where we live, like you said, capitalism is very much still a real thing, still the what keeps the clock going, what keeps the world moving. And for communities to thrive, they have to have the funds to support them. So I definitely believe and agree with that statement wholeheartedly. $5 does go a long way, even $2. So if you can't spend the time to go out and support local Indigenous communities, you can at least share your funds if you're able. And I think I don't have any other questions for you today, but is there anything else you would like to share as we approach Indigenous Peoples Day or Chiefs Day? Anything you're looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to more of this, seeing more of these collaborations. I'm looking forward to more of hearing more voices like mine and seeing more faces like my mother's in places that we haven't, and hearing more of a liberation and freedom speech as opposed to what we're going to get out of it and what does that mean. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, it looks like we have a question from our audience watching. We see, what do you think that communities of faith should be doing about land acknowledgements or similar statements? That's from Laura Hartman.
Oh, that's a very good question. Very good question. I think that it's very important that if you're looking at doing a land acknowledgement or you want to incorporate it, you should have somebody if from those communities do that land acknowledgement, because it's always another thing to have people of faith. As much as we are communities of faith and we still have faith, there's still a bunch of that that history. When you're standing up there and you're still speaking like, this is the land that we are on. It's not the same as if you reach out to those communities. So I think that that's still what should be happening. It's great to put statements on your website and things like that, but it's the intention. It's the intention and the time behind it that I think that matters when you do something like that.
Thank you so much, Taysha, for that answer. And thank you so much, Laura Hartman. She's actually one of our friends and partners at the IPL Raise, who's doing work down in Roanoke, fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline right now. So thanks so much for that awesome question. And thank you, Taysha, for your insightful answer. I think if we have no other questions today, I'll begin to wrap us up now. Thank you so much, Taysha. This is, like you said, just the beginning of more conversations, more collaboration with our Indigenous family. I'm so happy that we were able to get into it a little bit today and learn, honestly. If you all at home would like to join our e-newsletter, our supporters list, you can join at this link here, posted on the screen. A few other things happening with VIPL right now that we would like to share with you at this time. We are currently doing our initiative for climbing in the pulpits on the Bima and the Minbar. This is a time during the fall season where we encourage faith leaders to uplift climate and during their time of worship or some other time, whatever works best for their faith community. Please see this link here to register your faith community and get involved with uplifting climate with your congregations. Along with Climate in the Pulpits, we also have a job opening right now. We are hiring. We have a communications position open right now, full time. So please go to this website and check out that position. If you know someone, pass it along to them. That would be great. And for everyone else watching at home, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Taysha. I hope you are able to join us again. And we will see you all on our next show next week. Thank you.